Hey, hello everyone, and thank you so much for joining us tonight for Dirty Duke's Rate Case, What You Need to Know. We are with your Citizens Action Coalition, and we are so glad that you joined us for this webinar about Duke's request to hike bills by 42 bucks a month. We will do a quick introduction. We've got a lot of ground to cover tonight. Then we will dive into a bit of background about Duke, Indiana's largest electric utility. Our Kerwin Olson will give some context and a little bit of history because believe it or not, this is not our first rodeo with Duke, so he will fill you in. Then our Ben Inskeep will give an overview of Duke's rate case, what they are asking for and how it impacts consumers and our environment. We'll kick it back to me so I can share how you can get involved in this rate increase and make your voice heard. And we will conclude the webinar with a question and answer session. Okay, we're going to be using the Q&A feature in Zoom. So please, as questions come up throughout the webinar, please go ahead and type those in. But do be patient with us because we are going to wait to answer those verbally at the end of the call. And then please know that we are going to post both these webinar slides as well as the recording of the webinar on our website as soon as we can after this concludes. So no need to furiously take notes. It will all be available later. Okay. And some quick introductions. My name is Kelly Hammond. I'm the Director of Development here at Citizens Action Coalition. Been with CAC since 2013 and worn a couple different hats over the years, but I help to spread the word about the work that we do and get folks engaged in our efforts for affordable utilities and a healthier environment here in Indiana. We also have our fearless leader, Kerwin Olson, here this evening. He is our executive director, joined the team back in 2005, and has worn a lot of hats for Citizens Action Coalition over the years and today in his capacity as our executive director. We're grateful for all you do, Kerwin. Thank you so much. And we also have Ben Inskeep with us tonight. Again, he'll be presenting a lot about the rate increase, and he joined our team a couple years ago. Before coming to Citizens Action Coalition, Ben analyzed utility rate increases from across the country, professionally, not just for fun, although I'm sure it is fun too, Ben. But as you'll see in the webinar this evening, Ben's really able to go through thousands of pages of testimony and very detailed spreadsheets to break down how these increases will impact customers. Last, a little bit about Citizens Action Coalition. We were founded here in Indiana back in 1974. So this year is our 50th year advocating for Hoosier consumers. We are a consumer and environmental advocacy organization founded in response to the energy crisis. We watchdog all the big utilities here in Indiana, 5 large electric, 3 big gas, and several large waters as well. We advocate for a variety of issues dealing with consumers and our environment, from energy policy, utility reform, healthcare, pollution prevention, and family farms. There's really 3 main ways in which we advocate. One is, of course, regulatory advocacy, why we're here tonight, engaging on behalf of customers when it comes to utility issues at the Regulatory Commission. We also have a presence at the Indiana State House. Kerwin makes sure our legislators know how proposed bills will impact consumers, since the utilities also have a presence at the State House. And we, of course, also organize communities across the state because we're all stronger when we stand together.
All right. Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us this evening, and thanks, Kelly, for your kind words. I just wanted to level set, provide a little bit of background real quick, and of course, the first bullet there is again level setting here with Duke. From our perspective, they're easily the most sophisticated and influential utility in Indiana. Very, very good at what they do, whether it's government affairs and lobbying, whether it's PR and media work, whether it's community relations, either with local units of government or the community itself, and nonprofits. They know what they do. They have a lot of tremendous influence and reach across the state, and that, of course, has led to very successful efforts at the General Assembly over the years, whether they were Duke Synergy before that, and Public Service Indiana. Many may remember PSI Indiana as well. They are part of the Duke Energy empire, if you will. Duke Energy Indiana is an affiliate of the larger Duke Energy holding company. And they are, much like many of Indiana's investor-owned utilities, a cash cow for their parent company and their Singapore Sovereign Wealth Fund, which owns close to 20% of Duke Energy Indiana, using Indiana to feed their investors and Wall Street at the expense, we believe, of captive consumers here in Indiana. They are by far the biggest laggard in the state of Indiana in terms of the clean energy transition. They are still heavily reliant on fossil fuels, coal and gas, and they have massive costs associated with all of the waste product from burning coal over the years, otherwise known as coal ash. But they are easily the biggest laggard in the state, and arguably the biggest laggard in the country, as they remain almost exclusively reliant on fossil fuels. And as I said, over the years, we have been working hard to mobilize Hoosiers throughout the state to fight back on Duke Energy and some of their proposals, whether it's the boondoggle at down at Edwardsport, or working to clean up their coal ash ponds and transition to clean energy, invest in energy efficiency. And we are down there at the State House and at the Commission advocating strongly for affordability for customers, and working with Hoosiers as well as lots of partners throughout the region and the state dealing with Duke Energy, whether those are in the Carolinas or elsewhere. But Duke's a big corporation, and we have lots of strong allies, friends, and colleagues across the country that we frequently talk to and work with on Duke related issues. Yeah, we can't help ourselves. We fought Edwardsport for a really, really long time, invested a tremendous amount of resources in fighting the Edwardsport boondoggle, which was an extreme ripoff in the state of Indiana that has exacerbated, the utility affordability crisis in our state. And everybody might remember, if you were around, it was going to be the cleanest coal plant ever, et cetera, et cetera. But what we have is another coal plant that was cost in excess of $3.5 billion all in total. It can operate by burning natural gas, or let's make a Rube Goldberg machine that costs $3 billion to turn coal into gas. So effectively, what we did is we spent, we built one of the most expensive, if not the most expensive, gas plants in the history of the country. We should have just made a natural gas plant to begin with; would have saved ratepayers billions of dollars. Extraordinarily expensive, unreliable operations, and of course, it led to the extraordinary major ethics and corruption scandal that impacted the Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission, with the termination of the chairman of the commission and related felony charges, and the termination of the president of Duke Energy Indiana, the second in command, the chief operating officer of Duke Energy Corporate, was effectively forced to resign, as well as other issues. And CAC worked very, very hard for years on that, ultimately leading to, unfortunately, the plant is operational, but Duke shareholders did eat close to $1 billion, about $984 million, that Duke was not allowed to collect from ratepayers as a result of the efforts of CAC and many, many others. Yeah, and as we talked about Duke being a laggard, here's an excellent chart that shows in 2005 they were 96% coal, 3% gas, otherwise known as almost exclusively fossil fuels. Fast forward to 2023, what do you know? About 75% coal, 21% gas, otherwise almost exclusively fossil fuels. They have, with respect to their energy mix here in the state of Indiana, they are and remain almost exclusively reliant on fossil fuels to power the electric grid and serve their customers. If you were not aware, as you can see on that graph, very little investment in clean energy to serve their customers. And of course, Duke was instrumental as part of the efforts back in 2017 with Senate Enrolled Act 309 to kill net metering, as well as the efforts from previous years before that to kill the excellent Energizing Indiana program. So from our perspective, Duke is a huge laggard and responsible for a lot of the obstruction and delay and causing problems for clean energy in Indiana, whether that's utility scale or customer-owned choices like energy efficiency and rooftop solar. And yeah, let's talk climate pollution real quick. You can see this nice graph with the top 5 climate pollution facilities in Indiana. Their Gibson coal plant, if you didn't know, is second only to U.S. Steel Gary Works plant in terms of total carbon emissions in the state. And Duke, of course, still operates two other coal plants at Cayuga and Edwardsport, which also have significant carbon footprint. And just a side note that you'll notice that three of those top five carbon polluters are steel mills, which is why CAC has also been started to engage in terms of industrial decarbonization and figuring out a way to clean up our coal plants, our aluminum plants here in the state and reduce that carbon footprint. So just wanted to flag that. And with that, I will turn it over to my friend, my colleague, the amazing Ben Inskeep, to give a very nice, robust overview of what Duke Energy is seeking in this rate case. So take it away, Ben.
Well, thank you so much, Kerwin, and thank you, Kelly. I appreciate the kind words. It's great to be with you all tonight. I'm excited to share with you some of our preliminary results from analyzing the rate case filing. There were dozens of testimonies filed by Duke Energy, thousands of pages of documents. We're still obviously pouring through all those documents and spreadsheets, but wanted to give you guys the facts and share some of our analysis of what's happening, what are they proposing, and what's going on in this rate case. So to begin with, let me just remind folks that Duke Energy in Indiana, they are an investor-owned utility and they're a monopoly. So as a result, they do have to go before the Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission and ask for permission when they want to raise their rates or change the rates in any way. They have to get that permission because they're a monopoly and because they have that regulation in the state. So in this case, they've come before the IURC asking for a $42 a month bill increase. As Kelly mentioned at the start of this webinar, they filed this case back in April, so just a month ago. And then what they're doing is they're proposing this rate increase would hit customers in two phases. The first rate increase would hit soon after the commission issues a final decision in this case, which would occur in the first quarter of 2025. So that rate increase, the first part of that $42 a month increase would hit in March. And then the final amount would hit in January 2026. So January 2026 would be the timeline for when that full $42 a month bill impact would take effect if Duke's proposals are approved by the commission in this case. Now, big picture, Duke makes about $3 billion in revenue a year from Hoosier ratepayers without this rate case. So looking forward to 2026, they'd be making about $3 billion a year. In this rate increase proposal, they would like to increase that to about $3.5 billion a year. So it's about a 16% overall increase in their total revenues they're collecting from Hoosiers. But that percentage is a little bit deceiving because it's not spread out equally across all types of customers, which I'll get into shortly. And that results in a much larger bill impact for residential customers in particular. This chart shows how Duke's rates and their bills for residential customers have changed over time. So starting at the far left-hand side of the figure, back in 2004, 20 years ago, your typical residential bill was in the neighborhood of $80 a month. Fast forward 20 years, you can see in 2004, the typical Duke bill is about $129 per month as of April. You can also see that back in 2022, there was a little bit of a blip where bills spiked, and that was due to a temporary spike in fuel costs that we felt all around the country, driven by a few factors, including the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which led to a lot of pandemonium in the energy markets globally. Those fuel costs have since stabilized, and that's why you see in 2023 and 2024, those bills kind of returned to their pre-2022 levels. And then you can see looking out to 2026, what's proposed in this rate increase. You can see that red dot at the far upper right-hand side of the figure showing Duke's proposal would increase the typical residential bill to $171 per month by January of 2026. So let's dive into some of the details about the proposal for your household bills. Now, your typical family is going to be paying a mix of different types of charges that go into your total bill. The first type of charge is that fixed charge that you pay no matter how much energy you use. Every month, you got to pay that amount to Duke Energy. Right now, it's $10.54. they would like to bump that up 30% up to $13.70 per month. Now, of course, you also have charges that vary based on how much electricity you use each month. Now, Duke doesn't have just a straightforward, simple rate that charges you the same amount for all kilowatt hour usage in a month. Instead, they have what is called the declining block rate. How this operates is that the first 300 kilowatt hours you use in a month is charged a super high price, much higher than the rest of the electricity you use in a month. So after you use the first 300 kilowatt hours, the next 700 kilowatt hours you use is going to be charged kind of the medium tier pricing amount. And then finally, after you use that first 1,000 kilowatt hours in a month, you're going to be charged a lower rate for all subsequent usage during that billing cycle. And it's important to note that a typical bill is about 1,000 kilowatt hours a month on average. So if you're wondering what is this 300, 700, how does that actually impact you? A typical family is going to use on the order of 1,000 kilowatt hours in a month. So this presents a lot of problems. Not only is Duke proposing massive increases to all of these charges, upwards of 33% for each of those energy charges, but the way they've designed it really discourages things like energy efficiency. If you're using, let's say 1,200 kilowatt hours and you want to save energy, the financial benefit of saving that energy is going to be equivalent to that lowest tier rate. So you're kind of disincentivized to adopt energy efficiency measures under this type of a rate structure. That's why a lot of states and utilities across the country no longer have this type of pricing scheme. This is really a rare type of rate design in America today. It's really fallen out of favor because it does not comport with basic economic theory or just good public policy. In this rate case, Duke is proposing a new time of use rate option for residential customers. And I do emphasize option. This is a completely voluntary proposal. No customer is going to be forced onto this rate. What this rate would do is vary your kilowatt hour charges based on the time of day that you use electricity. Your fixed charge that you pay every month is going to still be the same, no matter if you're on the normal standard rate or if you want to move to the time of use rate. It's still going to be that $13.70 that they proposed. The change is with the energy charges. And the two figures on this slide show you how those energy charges vary by season of the year. The left-hand side is the winter half of the year, if you will, which is really fall and winter. And the right-hand side shows you those rates in the spring and summer. Those rates are pretty similar across the year. So let's just look at winter just to kind of interpret this chart a little bit. What this is showing from 0 to 23 on the x-axis there is the hour of the day. So on the far left-hand side, that 0 is equivalent to midnight. 1, 2, 3, that's 1, 2, 3 a.m. in the morning. And you can see that at the early hours, at the very beginning, at the beginning of the day, or if you will, in the middle of the night for most of us, that's when energy is going to be cheapest to use under the time of use rate. That's going to be that's about 9 cents a kilowatt hour under their proposal. Once you get into the daytime hours, it bumps up to the medium tier electricity usage cost. It's going to be about 15 cents a kilowatt hour. And then you have a few times of the day that are called the peak periods. These are times of the day when it's pretty expensive for Duke Energy to generate electricity because there's congestion on the grid or because there's just a lot of demand on the grid. This is when it's really hard for them to generate that final kilowatt hour to serve their final customer because there's so much demand on the grid. And so this is kind of a price design to try and encourage customers to align their usage patterns in a way that helps the grid out, helps the grid maintain reliability. And so under Duke's proposal, that peak period time would be from 5 to 9 p.m. throughout the entire year. And then in the winter time, they also have a second peak period that occurs in the early morning time from 6 to 8 in the morning. And that's because in those wee hours of the morning when people are waking up, getting ready for school, getting ready for work, the sun hasn't risen yet all the way, so you're not generating solar power, for example. It can be really hard to meet that demand because you get some really cold days in the winter and people are waking up, turning on the thermostats, making breakfast, and so on. So that's the kind of the intuition behind these rates. Now, a big part of this rate case relates to coal and the way that coal is impacting customers in Duke Energy Indiana's territory has mainly been to drive rate increases over the last decade. Duke has 3 major coal-fired power plants currently in operation in Indiana. The Cayuga Generating Station, which is 2 units, about 1,000 megawatts total capacity. The Edwardsport Generating Station that Kerwin mentioned earlier, it's much smaller. It's only on the order of 555 megawatts of rated capacity. And then their giant, massive Gibson Generating Station, that's 5 units. It's over 3,000 megawatts, so by far the biggest of these 3. And that's the big super polluter that Kerwin mentioned when it came to climate pollution, the number 2 climate polluter in the entire state of Indiana. What's important to know about these coal plants and our desire to want to retire these quickly is that Duke still has a lot of investment in these coal plants that they have not yet recovered from ratepayers. So on the order of $4 billion for these 3 coal plants that they still want to recover from ratepayers, and they still want to keep operating in order to make those revenues. In this rate case, Duke is proposing a series of proposals that are essentially doubling down on coal as a result. First, they want to burn a lot more coal every year. Now, we've had some success over the past, 5 years or so with the amount of coal that Duke burns gradually declining year over year. You can see that in those gray bars on this chart. You can see a general trend going downward. However, in this case, Duke is now suddenly forecasting a massive increase in how much coal they want to burn every year, on the order of roughly 40% increase between 2023 and 2024 and 2025. So that doesn't really make a lot of sense when you look at the economics, when you look at where industry and the market is going. So what could be driving this increase? Well, one of the things that stood out in their testimony is that Duke has entered into a series of bad long-term coal contracts to buy coal from coal suppliers. And it locked in these contracts in 2021, 2022 time period when coal prices were very high. So now Duke has a lot of agreements to take coal from coal companies, and it needs to burn it needs to burn that coal that it has agreed to buy. Now, Duke also wants to earn a profit when it procures too much coal. You heard that right. When Duke buys more coal than it needs, and its coal piles located on site at the coal plant get bigger and bigger and bigger, it wants to increase your rates higher and higher and higher as a result of that bad coal supply strategy that they are pursuing. So one of the proposals in this rate case is to do exactly that. It's asking permission to raise bills through the fuel adjustment clause rider in the future should their coal piles get bigger than the 45 days coal pile supply on hand that they say they need to have for reliability purposes. What that 45-day coal supply means is that if Duke had to turn all their coal plants on and run them full steam ahead, maximum burn, it would have enough coal on hand to do that for 45 days in a row. Finally, I will note, Duke is also proposing to delay the retirement of several of their coal plant units. So every 3 years, Duke goes through a resource planning process called their integrated resource plan that they kind of look out the next 20 years and figure out what resources do we need to supply customers with reliable energy that's affordable and that complies with all requirements. And so in those plans, they identify which dates those coal plants are going to retire, and then they plan ahead to make sure they have sufficient supply of other resources to fill in those gaps so they can reliably retire those coal plants while still making sure the lights turn on. But Duke, as Kerwin showed, has not been procuring new renewable energy, has not been doing what it needs to do in order to be able to retire those coal plants, as they previously said, because they failed to bring online a lot of solar and wind, like our other utilities are doing today. And so one of their proposals in this case relates to delaying these coal plant retirements. And that's obviously a big problem because coal has become much more expensive to operate, and they have some pretty darn bad environmental costs associated with them, which I will turn to now. Coal ash. As was mentioned earlier in this webinar, coal ash is a big issue. When you burn a lot of coal, you generate a lot of coal ash, and coal ash is toxic. And If it comes into contact with water, that water can carry those toxic constituents in that coal ash. It can migrate away from where coal ash is stored and get in our drinking water, our waterways. And that's really problematic, obviously, for the environment, but also just for our public health. So the EPA has put forth several regulations in the last 10 years that are requiring utilities to do better about making sure this coal ash is stored in a safe way. And all those times that Duke has been disposing of this coal ash in an unsafe way, then they have to go back to the drawing board, look at those massive coal ash ponds, those coal ash landfills that they have on site next to their power plants, and then they have to figure out a way to clean them up. Unfortunately, Duke is not proposing to clean up most of these coal ash sites. They're proposing to leave most of this coal ash in place in unlined pits in ways that would be unsafe for the long-term prevention of this toxic pollution migrating into our waterways and into our environment. So not only are they not cleaning it up, the way they are proposing to address these regulations would be super costly. So it's kind of the worst of both worlds, where you're paying a lot of money, but you're not even cleaning it up effectively. So you're going to have liabilities in the future that future ratepayers are very likely going to be on the hook for because they're not cleaning it up right the first go around. In this rate case, we're talking about $223.5 million in new coal ash cleanup costs that Duke has not previously proposed in other cases. And I say that because they have proposed cleanup costs for other coal ash ponds and landfills in numerous other cases in the past. In fact, just earlier this month, they got approval from the IURC for an additional $327 million in other coal ash cleanup costs that are separate from this rate case. And then finally, well, not finally, I'm sorry, there's coal ash costs that Duke has also got approved of in the past before that are separate than these two other buckets. And then finally, there's going to be more coal ash costs in the future that are not identified in this case, that are not included in that $42 a month, that Duke is still going to have to come back to the commission in the near future and make those proposals to clean up those coal ash pits. And those costs are also going to be, at least Duke is also going to be proposing those fall on the ratepayer as opposed to their shareholder. Now, the Edwardsport coal-fired power plant, well, the coal gasification plant, I should say, has been a super expensive power plant, but it's also not been reliably operating since it came into service. And now Duke is proposing an expensive study on carbon capture and sequestration technology that they could put at this facility to capture potentially some of the carbon dioxide emissions that would otherwise go into the air and into the atmosphere. Instead, capture that using some very expensive carbon capture technology, and then compress it and then inject it underground in underground formations thousands of feet below the power plant. This study is on the order of $17 million in terms of its cost. So not a cheap study, not a simple study. The Department of Energy is picking up close to half of the tab of the cost of this. But in this rate case, Duke Energy is asking for permission to track the costs that the Department of Energy is not going to be paying for, so that they can come back to the commission in the future and ask for ratepayers in Indiana to pay for those costs. They don't want to pay for the study. They want ratepayers to pay for it. We think this is particularly egregious because we already know this plant is super expensive. It's super uneconomic. And adding a super expensive and risky and untested technology at the site is only going to compound those issues as well as increase costs to customers. So we already can say the results of the study are going to be that this is a very bad idea. You don't need to spend $17 million to figure it out, Duke. Now, wouldn't it be a rate case in Indiana if a utility was not proposing an increase in their profit margin, would it? And that's the case here as well. Duke is proposing to increase its return on equity from 9.7%, which is the amount that the Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission authorized in the last rate case, up to 10.5%, which would be the highest profit margin allowed for any investor-owned electric utility in Indiana. Now, that might sound small, going from 9.7 to 10.5, that's what, 0.8 percentage point increase, seems pretty small. But that percent is multiplied by billions of dollars in order to calculate Duke's return each year. So that has a very big impact when you make a small change to that profit margin. The the table on the right-hand side at the bottom of the slide shows you at the 10.5% profit margin that they proposed. That's how they calculate that they needed essentially close to $500 million in additional revenue. That's that $491.5 million revenue increase that they're requesting in this case. Now, had they kept that 9.7% profit margin the same instead of increasing it, that would have only yielded a $433 million rate increase. So that would have saved ratepayers on the order of $58 million just by changing that one number, just by keeping that profit margin the same as what it currently is, which is a very healthy profit margin. And if Duke took a small haircut on that profit margin, just going down to 9%, which is still a very solid profit margin for an investor-owned utility, that would reduce the revenue request by over $100 million in this case. So very big impact. That's why the return on equity is so important. And that's why utilities spend a lot of time and money fighting hard on this issue. Now, you might say that if Duke had been struggling to earn a profit in recent years, it might be reasonable for them to come into a rate case and propose a rate increase. If they're losing money and they need to make investments, that's probably not a recipe for being able to make those investments. But that's not been the case, has it? Duke has actually been making money hand over fist from Indiana ratepayers. In fact, 2023, they made nearly $500 million in pure profit alone in Indiana. That's just from Indiana ratepayers. That's not including all of their other subsidiaries that Duke Energy Corporation has in Ohio and Kentucky and North Carolina and South Carolina and Florida. So this is just Indiana profit that they're getting. And you might notice that 2022 blip there. What happened there? Why did they have such a hit to their profit in 2022? Well, that's when they recognized the loss of, or there was a ruling at the Supreme Court in Indiana that said they were not allowed to recover certain coal ash costs that were part of that case. And so they lost a lot of that profit margin as a result of that decision by the court that said you can't collect those costs from customers. Now, pivoting a little bit to the big Duke Energy Corporation, the giant utility holding company that operates out of North Carolina, of which Duke Energy Indiana is just one of those subsidiaries. This slide shows three different charts that kind of show different metrics that are used to evaluate their profitability and their financial success. On the left-hand side, you see their net income, or their overall profit that they're getting. And since 2017, they've made over $19 billion in profit. The other charts on the right-hand side show their earnings and their earnings per share. And you can see that those are also increasing trends. They're not hurting, if you will. They're doing very well financially and having year-over-year success. In fact, Duke Energy just recently bragged in their earnings results that this is the 98th consecutive year that Duke Energy has paid quarterly cash dividend on its common stock. So this is clearly a utility holding company that is good at making money. Now let's pivot to a few of the other costs that are included in this rate case to highlight some of the things that are inappropriate that Duke is asking for beyond the coal issues, beyond the coal ash issues. There's also a lot of other things in this rate case. One of those has to do with lobbying and trade associations. Now, utilities will tell you that we've looked at our lobbying costs and we've taken them out of rates. And that's maybe technically true at a very narrow definition of lobbying. They do look at the very legal definition of lobbying, and they do remove a certain portion of those costs from customer rates when they're projecting out what their rates should be. However, that does not include most of the costs that Duke spends when it comes to trying to influence policymakers. So if you think of a broader definition of lobbying to include their regulatory advocacy, their public relations, their lawyers, all of the other ways that Duke operates to gain influence and power in a state. One of those ways is through their trade associations. They pay hundreds of thousands of dollars just to specific individual trade associations to be members of those. In fact, they want $1.1 million per year in trade association dues in this rate case, paid for by ratepayers. So that would mean ratepayers would be paying for them to give money to entities like the Indiana Energy Association and the Edison Electric Institute. These are examples of entities that lobby at the federal and state level. They've also pushed, I would say, pro-fossil fuel campaigns. They have fought distributed generation. And in general, these costs should be something that should be paid for by Duke Energy's shareholders, not by ratepayers. These are activities designed to benefit the shareholder and not customers in Indiana. There's also a handful of other concerns that we've identified that I wanted just to hit on very quickly as we continue to do our investigation. One is that Duke wants to have families in Indiana subsidize wealthy industrial customers through their rate design or through how the costs are allocated in this case. So one example is that families are forced to pay an unfair portion of coal ash cleanup costs. So the way that Duke allocates those costs puts a larger share of those costs on the backs of residential customers than industrial customers and other types of customers. It also wants families to pay an unfair portion of the costs of Duke's investments in power plants. So those coal-fired power plants being a prime example of that. Even though those industrial and commercial customers rely on those plants, basically Duke is proposing a way of allocating those costs that would force residential customers to subsidize these other types of customers. Now, the cost of actually litigating this rate case is also a cost in the rate case. So let me explain. When Duke files a rate case, they go out and they hire outside experts. They hire outside attorneys to come in and help them in the case, to argue the case for them, to present the best possible foot forward to have higher profits for their shareholders. So for example, in this case, they want $1.2 million for lawyers to argue for them in this case. It's just one case, $1.2 million. Just their one expert that they're bringing in from outside of Duke Energy to argue for that higher profit margin, that return on equity, is $75,000 just for their testimony. Big money. They also want $150,000 for witness training consultants. So I guess that would be consultants that come in and help their witnesses get prepared to testify in front of the commission and convince the commission that Duke needs more money. So we think this is unfair. We think that ratepayers should not be paying for Duke's costs to come to the commission and ask for a rate increase that hurts the very same ratepayers. Moving on to the next point, Duke wants to make customers pay for phantom lost revenues. What does that mean? Well, we talked a little bit about that proposal for those time of use rates earlier on an earlier slide. Duke is also proposing some voluntary time of use rates for their non-residential customers, the commercial customers, industrial customers, and so forth. So whether it be residential, commercial, or industrial, Duke is saying, well, some of our customers that are going to shift from their current rates onto these time of use rates are going to save money. And that's not fair. If they're saving money, that means we're earning less profit. Therefore, we're going to calculate how much money we think that we might lose from offering a time of use rate and having customers switch onto that rate. And we're going to charge customers for that amount. So $16 million they're proposing in this case. So $16 million increase out of that $491 million total is so Duke can recover these costs that it says it's going to incur as a result of offering time of use rates. And then finally, one thing that Duke wants customers to pay for in their rates is the cost of private aircrafts owned by their affiliate entities that they can use for transportation. So $1.9 million per year in those private aircraft costs. So again, not a cost that we think should be paid for by customers. This is a cost that if anybody's paying for, it should certainly be Duke's shareholders, not ratepayers. And I'm not going to go through this slide in detail. I did want to just flag it that Duke Energy, Duke's executives, Duke Energy Corporation's highest paid executives get paid extraordinary compensation packages. So for example, the president and CEO of Duke Energy Corporation, Lynn Good, she gets paid over $20 million a year in total compensation. She owns nearly $50 million in Duke Energy stock. And you can see some of these other executives that also have very nice, healthy compensation packages that are ultimately, at the end of the day, paid for one way or another by ratepayers. And then this chart is kind of just showing some of the affordability protections for low-income households, as well as some of the clean energy solutions that could be offered under various programs that utilities across the country are offering. So taking this one at a time, let's look at the affordability protections first. This is showing that Duke Energy does not currently have a discounted rate for low-income customers that are struggling to make ends meet, that cannot pay their bill, and that are facing potential disconnection. And right now, there's very few protections for customers that have low incomes that are struggling to pay their energy bills. Duke is not proposing to change that in this case. They're also not proposing to fix the fact that customers can be shut off when they can't make their bill payment on time. Duke does have a reduced security deposit for low-income customers, but it's still $50, and that's still a lot of money for customers that are moving into their service territory that want to set up service to have to pay that amount up front. Moving on to the access to clean energy solutions, as Kerwin mentioned, Duke has been a laggard when it comes to making the energy transition. This includes preventing things like community solar in their service territory, contributing to the end of net metering in Indiana, not offering any incentives for their customers to adopt innovative technologies, things like battery storage, which can help the grid as well as help give the customers backup power solutions. There's no dedicated EV home charging rate, so customers that would like to have an electric vehicle and charge those vehicles in an affordable manner don't have a rate to do so. Duke does have an energy efficiency incentive program, so we do encourage customers, if you're a Duke Energy customer and you're making investments in appliances or insulation, weatherization, those types of things, do visit the Duke Energy website and see if you're eligible for a rebate or can otherwise participate in those programs, because there are some good options. And Citizens Action Coalition is on their oversight board and does work very hard to improve those programs and provide the best possible value to Duke Energy customers through those programs. Finally, I will note the green tariff is an option for non-residential customers. That's primarily the large industrial customers, I believe, would be eligible for this proposal, where Duke Energy is saying some of the power that from one of their few renewable energy facilities, they would allow those industrial customers to buy some of those renewable energy certificates or credits from that facility to claim that their factory or facility is powered by clean energy to meet those sustainability goals. Thanks. Let me turn it over now back to Kelly to talk about how you can take action and participate in this case. Thanks.
Sure. Thank you so much, Ben. We certainly learned a lot this evening. We'll make a quick plug before we dive into the Q&A portion, or to the how you can take action portion. We will be wrapping this up with a question and answer session. So please, if you see the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, go ahead and type in those questions and we will get to them here in just a couple minutes, okay? Do want to say, it is so critical that you make your voice heard when it comes to rate increases like this. Our decision makers, our utility regulators, they clearly hear a lot from Duke Energy and the utility companies. So it's absolutely essential that they also hear from the people. One of the ways that you can make your voice heard about this rate increase is to attend the field hearings. We do not yet have specific dates and times for those yet, but we do know that they will be right around the corner here in June, which is just a couple weeks away, potentially July as well. So stay tuned, because showing up to those public hearings and speaking out is incredibly important. We also encourage everyone to submit written comments in this case as well. Okay, those are accepted by the Office of Utility Consumer Counselor. You have until July 5th to submit written comments about this case. Speak out. the environmental and consumer implications all need to be shared with our decision makers. Duke is already a big laggard, and as Ben pointed out, they're just going further down that coal path with this rate increase. Another thing you can do that helps immensely is to spread the word about the rate increase itself, but also the opportunities to engage in the rate increase with your community. That might mean online on social media, spreading the word about the increase and the field hearings. It could mean emailing or texting your friends about this, or speaking out verbally, right? Word of mouth makes a big difference as well. Tell your neighbors. Life is busy, and sometimes these rate increases roll right on past, and folks aren't aware until after it's all said and done that they had a chance to speak out. So the more of us that get the word out there, the better off we all are. Citizens Action Coalition, we do know that life is incredibly busy, and we do our best to make it really easy to engage in these rate increases. Our website is really a one-stop shop when it comes to information about the rate hike, but also how you can take action as well. We've made it real quick for you to submit written comments from our website. And then, of course, we share a ton of information about the case as well. And I will just drop into the chat a quick link to visit our website. Let's see here. And I will say that right now we've got this huge $42 a month rate increase with Duke Energy. But my friends, the fun never stops. So you can also sign up for emails and texts on our website. That way we can keep you in the loop as the next issue arises. There's always more. A little bit more about the field hearings because they are so important. These are pictures from the last year or so of field hearings all across the state. The utilities have been very busy filing rate increases over the last year or so. If you are a public speaking, if you enjoy public speaking, field hearings are clearly your time to shine. But I also wanted to mention that even if public speaking is not your cup of tea, showing up makes a big difference as well, right? It shows utility regulators that you care. When you do testify at these public field hearings, it is your opportunity to tell our utility regulators how you feel about Duke's request to raise bills by about $500 a year. It is so important for them to hear your stories about how this huge increase will impact your family and your community. Again, don't mean to sound like a broken record, but commissioners hear a lot from the utilities, and they need to also hear from the people. It does help immensely because if you can picture those pictures again, these are big rooms, you're talking into a microphone, you're stating your name and spelling your name. It can be a little bit intimidating. So you are definitely encouraged and allowed to write your comments aloud and then read from those notes. That might help you make sure that you don't forget any key points and that the commissioners hear everything that's on your mind about this increase. Our last little piece of advice about what to say during public hearings is, of course, be polite and concise and stick to your key points. There can be a lot of emotion associated with these rate increases because folks might not know how they're going to afford and make their budget work with such a significant increase. That being said, with these field hearings, we want to help regulators understand where we're coming from, not make them defensive. So that is why we encourage folks to keep it polite. Okay. And just a reminder, rate increases are very lengthy legal proceedings. So as we've mentioned, this whole party started on April 4th of this year. We're expecting an IURC order in February of next year. So almost a year for this whole thing to get resolved. Right now, we're in the public comment phase, of course, until July 5th. A little bit down the road, Citizens Action Coalition and other interveners will file testimony. And then I think the next thing to kind of ping for the public is the evidentiary hearing, which is very similar to a trial. It can be wonky, but there can be some excitement. You are able to access that online. And with that, I think we will dive on into the Q&A. Okay. Um, One thing that I am noticing here is that, yes, we will be providing the slides and the video from this presentation after the fact. We will do it as quickly as we can, hopefully tomorrow, if not a few days after that. Okay, thank you so much. And then our next question, which I think maybe we can direct towards Ben, is Duke proposing any new renewable energy in this rate case?
No, Duke is not proposing any new renewable energy in this case. I'll be honest, that is pretty typical that utilities are not proposing new generation facilities in a rate case. That typically happens outside of a rate case in a separate proceeding where they come to the commission and ask for permission to build a new power plant, and they get a kind of a pre-approval to do that. And in this case, they're not proposing to, it's not like they built a big solar plant and now they need to roll it into their rates in this case. So it's not really part of this case either. Unlike some of the other utility cases we've seen recently.
Erwin, what would you like to add to that?
Oh, I wasn't going to add to that, but I was going to talk quickly about the field hearings because there is some public information that is available now. They have announced that the field hearing, the first field hearing, will be on June 4th in Terre Haute at Ivy Tech Community College. So look for that information coming out from. We'll certainly put that out there, as will the OECC and the IURC. And they have also indicated that 3 additional field hearings will be held, one in Fishers, one in Bloomington, and one in New Albany, with dates and locations to be announced later. Yeah, that's pretty quick. June 4th, 2024, 6 p.m. at Ivy Tech Community College will be the first field hearing out there in Terre Haute in this Duke rate case. So.
Paradise starting us off strong. Thank you so much, Kerwin. That's really exciting to know, and we will be working hard to get the word out about that hearing. And any help, I promise you all, sharing stuff on social media helps us out so much because we're fighting algorithms. So the more you can spread the word and help us spread the word, the more folks see and learn about these hearings. Awesome. We've got another question about outcomes of this rate increase. And Kerwin and Ben, I'm gonna let you guys fight over this one. What outcomes are likely? Does the commission entertain alternatives or compromise? Or would they accept or reject the proposal outright?
I'd be happy to start us off. So these are just Duke's proposals that we've shared tonight. Other parties are going to have the chance to come forth with their own proposals and to rebut Duke's proposals and explain why it's bad or why they need to be modified. And yeah, the commission then at the end of the day does have a lot of discretion to approve, deny, modify those proposals either by Duke Energy or by other parties. So nothing is written in stone yet. This is why it's super important that we have a great turnout, those public field hearings, that the commission hears directly from affected ratepayers about why Duke's proposals are unfair, are not, are too expensive, are harming our climate, are irresponsible for our environment, and so forth. So yes, your voice does matter, and it's important to know that, yeah, nothing is set in stone now, and things can change from what you've seen tonight. And we do have a real shot in rate cases to make a meaningful difference, to fight back against those initial utility proposals. Oh, I think you're muted, Kelly.
Yeehaw! I need more coffee. Thank you, Ben. Appreciate that, your response there. We do have another great question about whether these meetings are part of the 2024 Duke Energy Indiana IRP public stakeholder meetings. This is a great point because it is busy to have both a utility rate increase along with an integrated resource planning process. IRPs happen every 3 years. Duke has kicked off theirs this year. Um, and the public hearings that we're speaking about are separate from the integrated resource planning process meetings. But great question. It is unique to have both of these things happening at the same time, as far as I know. Um, and while we're on that topic, I know it's early in the IRP process, but Kerwin or Ben, would either of you like to provide a little bit more context on IRPs?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, Ben mentioned integrated resource planning process earlier. That's something the utilities are required to do in the state of Indiana once every 3 years. It's a 20-year snapshot in time, if you will, looking forward about how they are going to serve the electric needs of their customers in their service territory. What is their load going to be? What is their energy mix going to be? Very complicated, wonky, wonky process. However, as part of the integrated resource planning process, they are required to have a public stakeholder process as well, in which the public can participate. They have to have at least 3 public meetings. Generally speaking, most of the utilities have more than 3 public meetings, but they have to invite the public into meetings, give presentations about where they're at in the process, what the process is out, what the process is all about, and allow for comments, questions, and even presentations from stakeholders or members of the public if they so choose, if they want to make those at the IRP meeting. There's no necessarily direct relationship between the IRP and the rate case per se, other than the integrated resource planning is the general idea is that it informs utility filings moving forward. So whether it's a request to build a new power plant, sign a power agreement with a solar farm, invest in efficiency, whatever the case may be, all of those filings with the commission should be consistent with what their IRP says. And as Ben noted in one of the slides he presented, this delaying their coal plant closure, for example, is inconsistent with the most recently filed IRP that Duke is participating in. And it makes it really difficult and challenging when you have an IRP going on at the same time as a rate case. They're sort of related, but they're not, because the current rate case is supposed to be relying on the previously filed IRP. So and just one other note, the new IRP stakeholder process was actually the result of the Edwardsport IGCC boondoggle fiasco and scandal, because it was generally acknowledged, while not publicly, but it was widely acknowledged and understood that the Edwardsport IGCC was a power plant that never should have been approved. And had there been a robust IRP process in place at the time where public was allowed to participate and comment, that thing never would have happened. So if there's any good that came out of Edwardsport, it was this new, improved public participation process in the integrated resource planning process, or IRPs, that has, partially turned on the lights, opened the blinds, if you will, open the hood, let the public get a look inside. We've only been doing this in Indiana for, roughly 10 years or so now. So we're learning as we go as far as what an IRP process should look like. But CAC is all in on integrated resource planning processes. We file extensive comments in those cases that are available on the IURC website. And we take that process very, very seriously, because what we're talking about here is billions and billions and billions of dollars of public money confiscated from captive consumers, if you will. And so, these investor-owned electric utilities have monopoly service territory, guaranteed rate of return, awesome obligation to serve the public, but at the same time, this is an extraordinary amount of public money that they're taking. Their operations also have an enormous impact on the quality of our environment, the quality of our public health. And so the public should be allowed to participate in that process, and the utility should have to engage the public and interested stakeholders in that process as well, because we would expect nothing less when it comes to the spending of our tax revenues and our tax dollars. You talk about tax increases, and people lose their minds, if you will. We're talking about billions and billions of dollars, not taxpayer money, but ratepayer money. So the IRP process is incredibly important. It's something that CAC takes very, very seriously and invests a lot of our time and resources in doing so, because we believe that effective utility planning will ultimately reduce costs for customers in the long run and lead to better outcomes. So long answer there, Kelly. Sorry about that, but yeah.
And if I could just briefly chime in with just how do these pieces all fit together? I think that can be kind of confusing. You've heard several different types of proceedings, a rate case, a case for a power plant, an IRP. How do these pieces fit together? I like to think of it as like kind of the IRP comes first. That's where the utility figures out what resources should we build. After it figures out what resources should we build, say it says you should build 200 megawatts of solar by 2027 because that's economic and will save ratepayers money. So then Duke will come in for a case at the commission to get what's called their certificate, a CPCN, which is official approval from the commission to then build that power plant, and it gives them the certainty that they know in the future they'll be able to recover the cost of that power plant. So that's a one-off special case where they get that approval to build that power plant. And then after that, in the future, when they have their next rate case, that's when the costs of that power plant they built, the solar panels, for example, that's when those costs get incorporated into base rates and end up on customer bills. So that's how those kind of three pieces fit together.
Thank you both. Very interesting and very important. And I feel like while we're on the topic of resources, we do have a question about, is there any nuclear power in this rate increase? I think we could also add on, is there any nuclear power being considered in their IRP that we know of at this point? Ben, would you like to take a stab at that?
Kerwin, I see you are unmuting. Did you? Okay. So Duke Energy does not currently have any nuclear power plants in Indiana. There's no current nuclear power plants located in Indiana, although a couple of our utilities, Indiana Michigan Power in particular, buys some nuclear power from a power plant it owns in Michigan. So no nuclear power in this case. In Duke Energy's integrated resource plan, they are considering all sorts of types of resources in the future, because Duke has a lot of coal. They've said they're going to retire these coal plants by 2035, although we've seen some of those early retirement dates get shifted out. So it has tons of megawatts of coal, and it needs to find replacement resources in order to still reliably serve customers. So nuclear is one of those resources that is being considered, including small modular nuclear reactors, SMRs. So that is part of the integrated resource planning process. We get involved in that, make sure. So for example, one of the issues there is Duke's cost assumptions about how much an SMR is going to cost. Is that a reasonable assumption? And we haven't seen those built yet. Pretty much anywhere. There might be arguably one or two in operation in Russia and China, but none in America today. And none have been approved by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to even be built in America today. So yeah, so we're right now, that's one of the examples of an issue that we're working in that integrated resource planning process to make sure those assumptions that are going into that modeling are reasonable, so that the output of that modeling is good for ratepayers. We want to make sure Duke is not pursuing another costly boondoggle like they did with Edwardsport.
Thank you very much. Let's see here. To what degree are we suffering from regulatory capture here in Indiana? Kerwin, I'm going to kick that to you.
I mean, that's the easiest question of the night. I mean, Indiana is the poster child for extreme and deep regulatory capture as well as legislative capture. Let's make no bones about it. The electric utilities and the other monopoly utilities call the shots at the State House, call the shot within the administration, and to a certain extent, we believe they also have heavy influence over the judiciary. So we're not alone, of course, in Indiana being captured by the monopoly utilities. It's pretty well understood that big oil owns Washington, D.C., and the monopoly utilities own the 50 state houses, well, 49 state houses, and then we have Vermont. But generally speaking, yeah, we are the poster child of legislative and regulatory capture by the electric and gas monopolies, as well as the telecommunication providers as well. And it's extreme and it's deep, and it's a problem.
Thank you very much. And I think I'll hop to this next question as well. Um, do these extremely large and out of touch rate increases, requests from Duke and Centerpoint, do they give any ammo to help rein them in through new regulation or legislation? I'll just say, and I could be missing something, but since I started with CAC in 2013, I cannot think of a base rate increase of over $40 a month until Centerpoint came in with 47 and now Duke here at 42. So these are pretty significant. We've had AES and I&M request in the last year or so, maybe a little bit longer, coming in at a little over 20. So we've seen two very huge increases, and does this give us any momentum to rein in um, that capture, both legislative and regulatory, through new legislation or regulation? Kerwin, I'll defer to you again.
Well, I mean, I think it's a problem that we're all aware of, and we have to continue to educate our state senators, our state representatives, as well as local officials, and we have to do everything we can uh, to raise the alarm bells, if you will, and finally have folks hold these utilities accountable. I mean, that's what groups like CAC and others are working on through the regulatory process, through the legislative process. But again, the utilities have deep pockets, deep influence, and play the game very well. So we just need to continue to do what we're doing, scratching and clawing and trying to impact change. If we have field hearings like we had that beautiful field hearing down in Centerpoint with well over 1,000 people, that thing lasted all day. I think we're starting to see some outcry, some pushback throughout the state on a lot of the issues around the regulatory and legislative capture, not only of the utilities, but also big industry in general. And I'm sensing some. Anybody who knows me, I'm not necessarily the most optimistic person in the world, but I have a renewed sense of optimism just because I'm starting to see, the frustrations that the public is dealing with as a result of this, poor policy and capture that we have in the state of Indiana. So yeah, we need to stay strong, stay united, and raise your voices, and never, ever be afraid to speak truth to power.
So incredibly important. And I'm just thinking right now of the contrast between folks we know when they're having a difficult time affording essential utility service. They have to make difficult decisions, right? We talk about the heat or eat dilemma. Do you buy groceries or do you pay your bill? Do you pay for medicine or go to the doctor or pay your bill? And when folks are feeling the pressure of rising costs of housing, of food, of healthcare, I really felt that very strongly watching the Centerpoint field hearing. Folks are squeezed really tough right now, and they are speaking out, and I think it's really important. Thank you for speaking out. And I think we are seeing a push for change, and that's very inspiring. I feel that too, Kerwin, the optimism there. Another question, and there are no stupid questions, so I will just say that. I hope everyone knows that, but Duke is proposing this rate increase. Who sort of votes yes or no? And that's the Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission that will have the opportunity to approve, modify, or reject Duke's proposal. And part of this question is also, am I going after my state representatives? And I think that's where we see our state legislators have passed some laws over the years that have allowed utilities to charge customers for more and more. So in this rate increase, please make your voice heard. You submit comments to the Office of Utility Consumer Counselor. Those written comments and comments from the field hearing get submitted by the OUCC into the official record of the case, so the regulators review them. After you submit your written comments, also get a hold of your state legislators. Our website has a lot of information about anti-consumer legislation that's been passed over the years. Legislators need to hear from the public as well. Kerwin or Ben, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I would just add, you absolutely should be communicating with state representatives and state senators about this rate case and about issues around the affordability of energy, because the reality is The Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission, number one, is governed by 5 appointed commissioners, all appointed that serve at the will and pleasure of the governor. So effectively, voters, citizens have no say in who those commissioners are. However, the Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission often goes out of their way to say that we are a creature of statute and only empowered with the powers granted us by the Indiana General Assembly. So legislators need to understand that that is in fact true. The General Assembly created the IURC. The General Assembly created the powers, the flexibility or lack of flexibility or authority that the IURC has. And the Indiana General Assembly is in large part the primary culprit in escalation of utility bills, electric bills in the state of Indiana because of their acquiescence, if you will, to the monopoly utilities and tying the hands of the regulators, limiting the discretion and the flexibility of regulators, where effectively they have turned the IURC into a rubber stamp for the electric monopoly. So I would say absolutely you need to be in constant communication with your state representative. And as far as in the question, I see, am I going after my state representative? I would say no, not necessarily. Probably depends on who your state representative is, I suppose. But I think it's important for legislators to understand the role that they do play. You can't let elected officials get away with saying, oh, that's not my job, that's their job. It's absolutely the job of the Indiana General Assembly, who is effectively the overseer, if you will, of the powers and authorities that those regulators have to protect you from the wants, wishes, and greed of monopolies.
Here. I'll just remind 2.87 billion in profit last year Duke's parent company made, and I believe close to 500 million Duke Indiana made. So good questions all around. Ben, how would this Duke rate increase flow through to the REMCs?
So this case is only going to impact Duke Energy and Indiana's retail customers. So if you're a customer of an REMC, this rate case will not impact your rates. Your rates are going to be determined by your local REMC and the board that controls it. So in Indiana, we have several types of utilities. We have the investor-owned utilities like Duke Energy and NIPSCO and AES. Those big guys, they're all regulated heavily by the Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission that has the power to approve or deny and set rates. But when it comes to our municipal utilities and our REMCs, those are not typically regulated. The rates are not regulated by the Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission. So I hope that clarifies kind of the impacts on this case.
Thank you very much, Ben. Thank you. Kerwin, has there been any legislation proposed that would give Indiana consumers some relief?
Yes, we've seen good legislation proposed related to trying to protect customers, trying to especially insulate low-income customers from some of these rate increases, some of the things Ben talked about as far as low-income rate classes, better payment plans, lower deposits, no deposits, disconnect protections. Recently, those bills have been, we've seen some good legislation from Senator Shelley Yoder in recent years, introducing some strong bills, as well as Senator Van Zandt last year. The challenge has been in recent years is that bills are not getting heard. And so we're seeing some good bills introduced, but we can introduce all the bills we want, but if the chairmen of those respective utility committees, whether that be the Senate or whether that be the House, doesn't hear those bills, then really those introduced pieces of legislation are merely window dressing. So utility chairs, committee chairs have a lot of power at the State House. We're also somewhat when it comes to bills in the House, the House has what's known as a bill pending rule, meaning if there's a bill pending that a committee chair has yet to hear, then generally speaking, anybody that would attempt to introduce an amendment to a bill, whether in committee or in a second reading amendment on the floor, they can't introduce that language because it's in a pending bill. and those opposed to that type of stuff will object to those. So I guess what I'm saying is it's a challenging policy, legislative, political landscape right now at the State House with respect to some of these consumer issues. And we've seen good bills introduced, sure, but they're not getting heard. So we need to continue to talk to legislators, express all of the challenges and concerns that we have around these utilities and affordability of energy in the state of Indiana, and try to get some momentum here, because yeah, we've seen good bills introduced, but they're not getting heard. So we've got some work to do.
Absolutely. How about some victories in recent utility rate increases? We've had so many rate increases lately. Um, what are some good things that have resulted from those increases? Ben, would you like to walk us through that?
Yeah, I can highlight just a couple examples. We were able to reach settlement agreements in the AES Indiana, in the Indiana Michigan Power rate cases that were proposed last year and were decided at the beginning of this year. And so we did get some beneficial changes in that. So for example, both of those utilities agreed to stop disconnecting customers on Fridays, customers who are behind on their bills and are struggling to make payments. So they have an extra day, they're not going to be getting disconnected on a Friday and be without power on the weekend. We fought back on things like fixed charges on residential customer bills and been successful at keeping those utilities from large increases in their fixed charges. We've also been able to significantly reduce the rate increase proposal that the utility comes in with and really cut that down to a much smaller number. So we've had a lot of success on that front. And then there's also a number of other provisions that we've been successful in getting, things like money to go to INCA, the Indiana Community Action Association, to fund things like weatherization of low-income housing. So things like that, I think, are examples that come top of mind to me. Kerwin, what would you add to that?
I mean, I think you've covered recent things, but I also reflect on, did you mention the Eagle Valley uh, case where it was shut down and IPL tried to collect a bunch of money for a power plant that wasn't operating? We were able to secure significant reduction in that amount as well. But yeah, that's something to consider too, is these, sometimes these cases do settle, which can be a good thing, depending on, the ultimate outcome, and you're able to make some good things happen, as Ben alluded to. But I think you hit the high points, Ben.
Kerwin, can you share a little bit more about Edwardsport? Believe it is a coal gasification power plant. Probably would make more sense for customers if we ran it as a gas plant, but could you talk a little bit more about how it works and some of the highlights over the years of its problems?
Well, I mean, this, you have to go back in time to the late 2000s, where clean coal was the thing. You remember, President Obama walking around in a clean coal hat during his campaign. But clean coal was going to change the world. You had the proposal of Future Gen in Illinois, Thoroughbred down in Kentucky, Edwardsport here, as well as other projects. There was going to be this collection of all these coal gasification facilities that were going to allow us to burn coal into perpetuity, cleanest coal plant ever. Unfortunately, the only plant that actually got built was Edwardsport. All of the other plants were canceled, mostly and only exclusively because of financing, costs, money, and too risky. But in Indiana, they were able to successfully get laws passed that shifted the risk and the burden onto the backs of customers through things like construction work in progress, otherwise known as QIP. It was greenwashing at its finest. Duke Energy sold the plant to the state of Indiana as it was going to capture, CO2, capture carbon, and be the first of its kind, and would be, the pilot project, if you will, that would lead to multiple, coal gasification facilities across the globe. And Duke was going to lead the way with this facility. But as we know today, whether they were lying or not, they dramatically underestimated the true costs of that facility. They had to corrupt the process. in order to get that power plant approved, because it never should have been approved in the first place. The whole thing stunk to high heaven the whole time. CAC knew it, and we were ultimately proved correct when the ethics scandal broke and we understood just how deep the corruption went, around that power plant. But really, as I mentioned earlier, the sad reality of that plant is CAC said then this thing's not going to capture one single drop of carbon. Still hasn't captured a single drop of carbon today. The commission rejected a proposal from Duke Energy to study CCS down at Edwardsport back in, I think that was a 2012 order, maybe 2011. So they've already told Duke Energy no, as far as carbon capture and storage goes in Indiana, or at least they've told them no, you can't have ratepayers pay for it. Now that CCS is for some strange reason back in vogue, they're once again exploring carbon capture and storage down at Edwardsport, even though we knew, number one, the costs were extraordinary. The reduction in output from the plant, by capturing carbon dramatically reduces the output and the efficiency of the plant. But more importantly, they told us that the geology around Edwardsport plant in Knox County was perfect for storing the underground geological sequestration of CO2. That proved to be wrong and false. They said back then that was not suitable for carbon sequestration. Now they believe rather than burying it 8,000 down the Mount Simon, they can bring it up, a couple of thousand feet to 5,000 feet in the Dolomite or whatever Potomac region, I believe. So they think, oh, did we say 8,000 feet? Oh, we mean 5,000 feet down. So even though they totally abandoned CCS at Edwardsport, now suddenly CCS is once again being studied. And the reality is, who do they want to pay for CCS? Taxpayers picking up half of the tab, ratepayers picking up the other half of the tab. The reality is CCS is a false solution to climate change. It's unbelievably expensive. There are better and cleaner solutions available today. And if this stuff was really a good investment, then companies would be investing their own private capital into these projects. CAC's always said some companies want to invest their own private capital, do massive coal gasification facilities with a bunch of pipelines on their own dime, go right ahead. But the reality is they can't, and they need to be subsidized 100% by ratepayers, by taxpayers, because it's just too risky. It's unproven. It's expensive. It increases the use of fossil fuels. I know that was going off the beaten path a little bit on Edwardsport, but Edwardsport really was supposed to be leading the way, if you will, in clean coal and CCS. And it was nothing but a big lie, nothing but big greenwashing. And Edwardsport today represents a significant amount of Duke Energy's earnings in Indiana. The reality is, the more money they spend, the more money they make. Edwardsport was the most expensive option, so they corrupted the process, allowing them to construct a power plant that never, ever should have been approved.
Hear, 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 hear. We'll say on our website, we've got a lot of great information, background on coal and a little bit of background on Edwardsport as well. We link to, oh my goodness, yeah, they believe over 10 years ago when we were advocating for consumers and in response to the Edwardsport power plant, carbon capture would have increased Edwardsport's construction cost by 37% and decreased its energy output by 20%. So just a fun fact that you can find on our website, along with a lot more information about this rate increase. I believe we've worked our way through the questions. Thank you for all of those questions, and thank you so much for being here this evening, learning about the rate increase. I know some folks are excited to start spreading the word already, and we appreciate you so much for getting the information out there, especially Terre Haute. Again, we got less than 3 weeks to get folks to that June 4th hearing in Terre Haute. So appreciate everyone for helping us spread the word. Any final remarks, Ben or Kerwin? Anything you would have liked to have said that we didn't get a chance to say?
Oh, I think we got it, and appreciate everybody being here. And I agree with Megan Anderson's comments of make your voices heard. And I know between CAC and our friends at Sierra Club and our friends at ARP and other places, we're going to get the word out and speak truth to power, make your voice heard.
Well said. Thank you all so much. We appreciate you, and we will see you at those field hearings. Take good care.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.